and you are very excited about this debate. We had the privilege to have a very special guest today. Professor Lawrence Reed is the president of the Foundation for Economic Education. It's first time in Romania. We hope to see him again next year or next years, and to share with us each year from his experience. I will try to say just a few words about him and about the foundation, and after this I will ask him to offer us different perspective about education. First of all, he became president of Foundation of Economic Education in 2008. He is a champion for liberty, and he cooperates with many newspapers all over the world. He published more than 1,000 articles, dozens of some other different perspectives in magazines and journals in the United States and abroad, as well as 5 books. His articles have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Christian Science Monitor, USA Today, Baltimore Sun, Detroit News, and Detroit Free Press, among others. In the same time, I'll try say just 2 words about the foundation. The Foundation for Economic Education, one of the oldest free market organizations in the United States, was founded in 1946 to study and advance the freedom philosophy. Foundation for Economic Education's mission is to offer the most consistent case for the first principles of freedom, the sanctity of private property, individual liberty, the rule of law, the free market, and the moral superiority of individual choice and responsibility over coercion. During its long and illustrious history, Foundation for Economic Education has published or hosted lectures for some of the finest minds of the modern age, including Mises, Hayek, Hazlitt, Friedman, Buchanan, and some others. Today, we will discuss about education, private versus public and homeschooling. And now I invite Professor Reed to have the floor and to share with us from his experience. Thank you very much because you accepted to come in Romania. And as you promised, please turn back, and maybe you will be probably a trainer in the next summer school organized by my colleagues. And why not for some other events? Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you. I hope you don't mind if I stay seated.
Please.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. I want to thank the rector and also Professor Glavin of the Rothbard Center and Romanian-American University for this opportunity to speak to you. I have been in Romania now only 3 days, but I have been impressed by many things. Beautiful weather, wonderful conversations, beautiful cities of Bucharest and Brașov. You mentioned that it's a little chilly this morning, which reminded me of something that the founder of our foundation used to say. Whenever weather was bad, if it was very cold or very stormy, and people would be commenting about what a terrible day it is, he would say, "No, it's a great day." And people would say, "What are you talking about? Haven't you looked outside and see how terrible the weather is?" And he would say, "No, it's a great day. Every day is a great day." And then he would say, "That's my way of showing appreciation for the fact that when it comes to the weather, God and not the government is in charge." So even on the worst of weather days, it could be worse than that if government perhaps were in charge of the weather. Romania is the 70th country, number 70 for me, that I have a good fortune to visit. And I have to say that in all countries, with no exception, every country I have visited, people are concerned about the quality and the costs of education. And in virtually every country I have visited, with very few exceptions, there is a general perception that education is in crisis. that there are some major things about education that need to be fixed. It's common across the world, in country after country, to regard a nation's education system as in need of serious attention. People will disagree over the depth of the problems and how to solve them, but there are few places in the world where people will honestly say, we have a wonderful system and there is little, if any, need for improvement. In most places, people feel very much the opposite, that there is a crisis in education. And you see, and you hear the complaints across the board, from all levels of society, common throughout most of the world. People complaining that, well, the test scores of students are not rising, or they're too low, they're stagnant perhaps. The schools and what they are teaching are not keeping up with the times, or with what markets are demanding of our graduates. A common complaint is also throughout the world that there is too much bureaucracy, that change is difficult to implement in education systems, and also that the more we spend, the more the results are disappointing. These are common complaints across the world in almost every country I've ever been to. In the United States, there are people who live in nice neighborhoods who often say, our schools are great. But they, at the same time, will say, but we know the schools in other places are not. The schools in our inner cities, not so good. But our schools locally are great. But even there, where you find that some of those schools are indeed better than those in the inner city, when you dig more deeply, you find that in most cases, it's not because of the schools so much as it is because of the parents. Because in those communities, parents, generally speaking, take a greater interest in the education of their children. And they send children to the schools better prepared to handle the challenges of schooling. So the parents often take far less credit for the education of their kids than they really should. That much of what they think is good in the system really stems from what they're doing at home, and the preparation they've given their children, and the interest they give their children in learning. Well, the question is, if there are so many similar and common complaints across the world with education, why is there this universal, almost universal dissatisfaction? What explains that? Why don't we have pockets where we can say, there's an entire country that has it right, where everything is going well, the schools are doing superbly well, consistently, there's our model. Why is there such universal dissatisfaction? Why is there an education crisis so widespread throughout the world, even in the richer developed countries? Well, if you look close, beneath the surface, you'll find, in fact, you have to ask the question, where is the crisis in education? If there is one, where is it? And you find, when you look closely, that it's not in those aspects of education that are provided by competitive market forces. It's almost always in those parts of education that are provided by the state. If you look at education, typically means a lot of things. It means computers, it means books, it means desks, it means facilities, as well as teachers. Well, the part that's provided through competitive market forces, like computers, like books, typically in most countries, that part is not in crisis. There you find, in computers, for instance, privately provided, you find more of them, better computers, more power and less cost, a smaller package, continuous improvements. The part of education that tends to be in crisis is the part that's provided and monopolized or subsidized or protected by government. This explains the systemic problems that we see across many countries. That's why, from the start, I think it's helpful to be thinking about, well, how can we take some of the successes of the marketplace, even the successes of the marketplace within education, and make them more universal throughout education? What is it that makes those market forces produce the quality that we've come to expect? And what is it about government that tends to cause chronic, never-ending, and very expensive crisis? I think incentives explain an awful lot of why there are bright spots in education that tend to be privately provided, and some dark spots that tend to be resistant to improvement no matter what we do. Spend more, whatever, to try to fix them. And this is not a matter of, government employs bad people and does bad things, and the market always employs good people and only does good things. Not at all. You have good and bad in both markets and in government. But one of the key differences is, in market provision of goods and services, customers, not captives, but customers, are able to say, no thanks, I'm not happy with this, I think I'll choose to go elsewhere. And that power of choice, it provides accountability, it provides incentives and rewards for improvements, not for simply showing up and punching in and claiming a paycheck. Now, having said that, let me present to you what I call 5 principles of education reform. And I'll give each of the 5 to you now, and then I'll go back and say a few words about each one. But these are principles that I think should guide our thinking, not just in Romania. I think they apply anywhere. They apply in the United States. They apply in countries, whether they are developed, undeveloped, or somewhere in between. These are universal principles that should guide our thinking as we try to improve the quality of education for all people. The first principle is education is more than just what happens in a formal classroom. It's more than just what happens in a formal classroom from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, or whatever. I'll come back and say something about each of these in a moment. The second principle is the children, or if you're talking about higher grades or college, the students, are more important than the system. The students are more important than the system. That sounds like so simple, and yet we don't often behave that way. We behave quite often, and our policies are often aimed at reinforcing the notion that it's the system that is the most important thing, not the students. The third principle is parents are a key ingredient in educational improvement. They're the most important ingredient, in fact. The fourth principle is choice and competition are necessary preconditions to improvement. Choice and competition are necessary preconditions. They have to happen as a base, as a foundation, if you expect school improvement to take hold and really snowball. And the fifth principle is one size does not fit all. One size does not fit all. That suggests, as I'll talk in a moment, that education should allow for variety, diversity, that there is no one single method or approach that applies best for everyone. Now let's go back and say a few words about each of these core principles. What do they have to say about education reform? The first one was, education is more than what happens in a formal classroom. So many people in many countries have come to think that education means just what happens at a formal, even perhaps just a government school from 9 to 3. They're thinking very narrowly. Instead, they should be thinking that education is really something that happens almost in every waking moment. It happens in the home. It happens by just being aware and alert, interacting with your surroundings, whether it's in the classroom or someplace else. You find that in countries where markets are relatively free, you have a multiplicity of ways in which, and vehicles in which people are educated. You have a thriving marketplace in Romania, as we do in the United States, in, say, magazines, in books, now internet access. These are all ways in which we learn, and they don't necessarily happen simply within four walls in a government-provided or even a privately provided classroom. So if you think in those terms, all of a sudden the world looks a lot bigger. The prospects for educational improvement can embrace more methods, tools, vehicles, times of day. This is a way of thinking of education in a much more flexible fashion than many people do. Many people are so focused on just the formal classroom. They should be thinking about all the ways in which students learn. There is, in the United States now, so how many of you have heard, in fact, of the Khan Academy? It's spelled K-H-A-N. You've heard of it? Have you utilized any of the resources?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary open source model.
Yes.
I think it's inspiring. Will we have questions and answers later on? Because
Yes.
I'm curious about something.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I do. We will allow for plenty of time for questions. Well, the Khan Academy, I encourage you to take a look at this. This is a remarkable new model, as you point out, for education. It's now getting a lot of attention in the United States. And it has a presence on the web. In fact, that is its presence. It doesn't have a building, it doesn't have a classroom. It consists right now of a website with almost 2,500 courses that involve video, all kinds of other tools, free of charge for anybody in the world. You can go on there and take a course in everything from second grade arithmetic to high school mathematics to college physics. And what the Khan Academy model does is it completely flips education. This is I'm excited because it's a tribute to diversity and competition. You know, so many people have thought that education means you go to a classroom and during the day you hear lectures. And then at home, that's where you're an autodidact, where you learn yourself by doing homework. The Khan Academy completely flips that. The classroom is a place where the teachers act as tutors, not lecturers. The lectures are in video form that the students look at home. Then when they come to the classroom, they can take exams, they do further work, and the teacher can bring up on a computer in real time various means of assessing what the students are learning at that moment. And a teacher can see, Judy over in this seat needs a little help in some fractions, so she can go over and help the students. The teacher acts as a tutor. But much of the learning actually happens in the lecture material by video and other interactive web-based components with the students using these resources at home. The remarkable thing about it is that it's supported by contributions, by charitable gifts. Bill Gates of Microsoft recently gave them a very substantial gift. And now 2,500 courses are available in a wide variety of subjects, free of charge for anybody, anywhere. And another thing about the Khan Academy is that it tends to instill in a student a lust for learning. The students find the delivery of education motivational, exciting. The videos are done in a way that really stokes the students' interest. They want to learn more. And that is probably the greatest gift that a teacher or a system can give a student, the desire to learn. Because in the long run, we learn more of those things that we want to learn and apply ourselves to than what the teacher just sort of dumps into our head against our will. So the purpose of any educational system ought to be to instill in students a desire to learn, because in the long run, a student will learn more from their own efforts than from what someone else dumps into their brain. And the Khan Academy achieves that, which dramatizes what I'm saying here, that education doesn't have to happen just in the traditional classroom sense. And markets tend to provide a multiplicity of such media, and it's only getting bigger. The second point I made was that the children are more important than the system. What we need in schooling is learning centers, not employment centers. And I don't know the Romanian system anywhere nearly as well as I know the American system, but I can tell you that in our system, there is way too much focus on making schools serve those who work in the schools rather than the customers that they're supposed to serve. Do you have that problem here?
More than.
More than us. It's a serious problem in America. The focus is on the system as if the system is more important than the children. This came home to me very vividly about 20 years ago. I was living in Michigan, and there was a family who had a third grade student who was gifted, a gifted student. The local public or government school where they were assigned to send the child did not have a program to deal with gifted students. But it so happened that about 15 miles away, in another public system, they did have a gifted program. But it was outside the geographic district that the parents lived in. And in our system, certainly at that time, less so today, you were assigned to the school within the district that you lived. Well, these parents, in an effort to help their child, who was not doing well in the system that didn't cater to his needs, they began sending their child to the gifted program in the other public school. But they were not high-income people. They had the public school in the other district charged them about $1,500 to send the child there. Okay, even though they were already paying taxes for their system back in their own district. Then the parents went to a school board meeting in their district and asked the school board, would you please release the funding that we pay in taxes and that the government provides? Will you release the funding so that it can follow our child to this other school? Now, you would think that the school board would say, well, of course, if he's not here, we don't need it, right? And in fact, because the child was enrolled in the other school, they weren't going to get any state aid at all. So it wouldn't be any problem, you'd think, for that school board to say, oh, sure, it just means money goes there instead of here. It's not coming here anyway because your child is going there. I went to that meeting where the parents made their case. Can you help us? We have to pay the tuition to the government school. Will you release the government funding? And I heard a school board member say this to the child and to the parents. He said right at the meeting, you live here, you go to school here. Think of it. Here are parents who want to help their child. They're doing what's best for the child. And the system tells them, sorry, we're more important than you are. At one point, the school board said, well, but what about transportation? There's no funding for that. You're going to have to pay to take the child every day. And they responded and said, well, we've been doing it for 3 months now. It's not an issue. The husband works near where the school is. This is not a problem. They were looking for all the reasons to tell the child, we're more important than you are. You stay right here. That's simply wrong. And that's the evidence of this mentality that the system is more important than the child. One other point on this. In America, in some states, we have problems with the organized labor unions of teachers. And some years ago in Michigan, I remember the teachers union coming out with a statement in which they said, we will oppose any school district that wants to contract with any private company for the provision of any school support service, like food service. You know, if a school district wanted to contract with a private food company to provide lunch for the kids, the union said, no, we'll oppose that. You have to do it with government employees, because the teachers union also represented those people too. So they were thinking of themselves. Well, at my little think tank at that time in Michigan, we got to thinking, well, what can we do to show the public that this is very self-serving, this is designed to, to benefit the system and the union, not the children. Why should any school district have to pay more to clean the floor or serve the food to the children than they have to? Why can't they enjoy some savings by shopping in the marketplace for these things and put the savings to work in the classroom for the children? What's wrong with that? But one thing we did that really changed the law in Michigan, got a lot of public attention, was this. We were seated around a table, my staff and I, very similar to this room, and debating this issue, and one of my staff members said, what about the teachers union itself? They have a headquarters in East Lansing, Michigan, 600 employees at the union headquarters. Do they provide all of their own food service and custodial work? And what if they contract with private companies? Let's find out if they do. So I sent one of my employees down to East Lansing, and he sat in the parking lot across the street from the union. And he watched the businesses coming and going. And then we called these businesses to verify this and issued a news release to the public, pointing out that at their own headquarters, the very same teachers union that opposes any school district securing these services privately, they were doing it at their own headquarters for all of their food service, their custodial service, their security, their mailing, on down the line, and the 3 out of 4 companies they were contracting were non-union. So what does that say? When it came to their own bottom line, the teachers union saw the value of competition and shopping around and saving money, but they did not want any school district to do the same. Well, a third principle I mentioned is that parents are the key ingredient. And here I think in every country there's more that we can do. That parents can do a better job, and they tend to do a better job when you give them opportunities, when they can make a choice, when they feel they can make a difference. There have been many studies, hundreds of them, in the United States and elsewhere, about what relates to student outcomes, student performance, student test results, positively. What can you do here that causes that to go up most directly? Some people say, well, it's money. We just need to throw more money at the schools. Well, we've done that. And it seems in many of our inner cities in America, the more money we spend, the lower the performance. In fact, 3 years ago in Detroit, Michigan, in the inner cities, a new set of test scores came out, and they were so bad that the school superintendent said publicly to the local newspapers, the Detroit student test scores now are so bad, they are no better than if the students had simply guessed at the answers. Now think about that. What does that say? That means if they had never shown up in school at all, if they just guessed at the answers with no schooling whatever. Well, what are we spending $16,000 per student for in the schools if the end result is no better than if they had never come? I mean, that's how bad in some places like Detroit education has become. Some people say, well, it's class size. The smaller the class, the better the student performance. And there's a slight correlation there, but it's not as strong as people think. The one ingredient that connects with student performance more than any other is parental involvement, involving the parents. And I'm not talking about a system where the parents come to meetings and they have to sit through boring meetings and school board lectures at them, and then the parents make an objection and the school board dismisses them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where they're personally involved, they help the students with their homework, they can choose the school they go to. The more choice you tend to give people, the more attention they tend to give to that issue. In fact, it's an odd thing that in places like the United States, you have people who spend more time choosing what car they're going to buy than what school their children will attend. And in almost every case, it's because when it comes to the school, there's no choice. Unless you have a high income and can opt out of the system, you have to go to the government school you've been assigned to. So you pay little attention to it. So parents seem uninterested, but it's more because of the disincentives than it is for any other reason. The fourth principle that I mentioned is choice and competition are necessary preconditions to school improvement. Every education reform idea, and there have been a lot of them, I'm sure here in Romania too, lots of proposals, ideas for improvement, they all fall into one of three categories. Every reform. One, rules. Two, resources. Three, incentives. Let's take a look at those briefly. Every reform is it falls into one of those categories. Rules, resources, or incentives. This one, the rules category, that means, people who say education's bad, we need to fix it. So let's issue more rules, more mandates. Let's have more studies. Let's tell the teachers what they have to do. Let's devise their curriculum for them. Let's issue penalties and commands. So this is the top-down central planning, just by decree we can make education better. Believe me, in the United States at least, we have tried this. At the state level, at the federal level, at the local level, people see problems and they have traditionally applied new rules, new mandates, new requirements, penalties, until finally the system is so rigid, so top-down, that the people who are actually supposed to do the educating, the teachers, feel as though they have no room. They're told what to do. They can't be creative. In America, at least, we have exhausted the rules approach. There is no more room for more rules, I think, in America. We've tried that. And the result is test scores are not getting any better. The second category of reform is resources. This is where people say, we just need to spend more. We just need brighter classrooms and fancier buildings and swimming pools or whatever it takes. Believe me, in Kansas City, Missouri, about 15 years ago, the schools were so bad that a judge ruled that, the problem is they're not spending enough in Kansas City. And he ordered the state to triple the spending in Kansas City. Guess what happened 10 years later? Do you think the schools, they have big swimming pools, they built a lot of new schools, but do you think the student outcomes were any better? 10 years later, after all this spending, the schools were regarded as so bad that the state had to take them over. So we got nothing for all that money. That's a particular example, extreme example, but in America we have exhausted resources as a reform tool as well. Real, after inflation spending on education in America is up by more than double in the last 15 years, and yet test scores have gone no place. The third category of reform is, I think, the most promising, and that is the category of incentives. This observes that people are creatures of incentives and disincentives. And don't you see that in our daily behavior? We tend to do more of those things that we have opportunities for reward in, those things in which we get penalized, and we do less of. And so if you want to get better education, I think we need to be thinking more in terms of how can we improve the incentives so that teachers get rewards when they do well. So that schools do better when they save money and produce better outcomes, instead of just adding to the staffing. The category of incentives, I think, offers the greatest opportunity for reform. Can you imagine, let's take an extreme example. Let's suppose we decided, no, resources and rules are the way to go. Let's have a top-down, centrally planned, mandated, rule-driven, bureaucratic-heavy educational system, and we'll make things happen. Like they used to say, Mussolini, he made trains run on time. You ever hear that phrase? Mussolini made sure the trains ran on time. They really didn't run on time, by the way, but there was that feeling that because he commanded it, the trains ran on time. The most extreme top-down education system would look like this. You'd have, everyone would have to attend a government school, and they would have to attend the government school that they were assigned to, not a different one. They couldn't choose between government schools. All the food that was served to the students would have to be produced on collective farms and sold through government grocery stores. All the books would have to be produced in government book factories by government authors. I mean, most people in the world today would say, that's ridiculous. Where would be the incentive for improvement? All you would do is reward the system at the expense of the students. Parents have to be able to say, and this is what I mean by choice and competition, they have to be able to say, no thanks, I don't like what you're doing here, I can go over here. In the absence of that opportunity, you simply have a system of disincentives for improvement. If you have captives instead of customers, you must expect lousy results. How many of you here think that the state loves your children more than you do? And yet everywhere you hear people express skepticism about allowing more freedom for parents. Oh, they might not know what to do, they might make silly choices. Well, who is the state but other parents? Is there something about being a government employee that suddenly makes you more caring of someone else's children? It's absurd. The more choice and opportunity you give to parents, the more interested they become in those things, in better schools in this case. And finally, one size does not fit all. Children are not all the same. The methods of delivery of education are not the same. We should be thinking in broad terms of encouraging the greatest flowering of different options. Some might fail, but it's through failure that we learn. It's through choice that we create incentives for improvement. We cannot be afraid of failure. As long as the system is responsive through choice and accountability, failure can be a great teacher. You know, in the United States, you still have people who say, oh, we can't allow more private educational options because maybe there'd be a school somewhere that wouldn't do a good job. And so out of fear that that could happen, what do? We continue to press children into schools where they're falling through the cracks by the millions in places like Detroit. In the U.S., in the last 20 years, I'm happy to say there has been movement. It's been tough, slow, there's still lots of room for improvement, but there has been movement in the areas, in the directions that I'm talking about here. And it's come in several forms. I'll work this to a conclusion so we can get to some questions, but in the process of concluding here, I want to suggest some of the options that might be available in Romania and in many other places as well. And I'll do that by telling you some of the things we've begun to experiment with in the United States. 25 years ago, we pretty much had one option for parents, and that was the government school they were assigned to locally. There were private schools, but few in number. There wasn't much homeschooling 25, 30 years ago. We had pretty much the assignment system. You live here, you go to school here. Okay? Well, there was a growing consensus that that was not conducive to improvement in education. So the movement for things like choice and accountability opportunity really has gathered steam in America. So now we have choice in many places among government schools. The situation I described for you earlier about the parents who wanted to send their gifted child to the other school, that can't happen now in most places in America. If a child wants to go to a different government school, he can go, and usually the money will follow the child. So that problem has, in most places in the U.S., been largely fixed. That's an improvement. That's a little more choice. That's more focus on the kids, less on the system. And now we have charter schools. And how many of you have heard of charter schools in the U.S.? Charter schools are still public schools, but they are substantially deregulated. And I'll give you an example of the state of Michigan, where I lived for 33 years before moving to Georgia last year. In the state of Michigan, in 1999, the legislature passed the first charter school law in Michigan. And what it did was, it said the universities and the local government school districts can create new schools. And if they do, they can have their own board of directors, drawn from the public. They don't have to be elected, which is silly. You know, you go into elections to vote for people you never heard of, to run a school. It seems so inefficient. But with charter schools, they can be independent. Certain regulations follow, but much less than with traditional government schools. Well, what has happened? Local government schools don't start new ones this way. They almost never create charter schools, but the universities in Michigan have done it by the hundreds. One university, Central Michigan University, has created 150 charter schools for first grade through 12th grade around the state of Michigan, many of them in the inner city. These are substantially deregulated schools. Guess what's happened in the inner city in places like Detroit, where for so long parents were dismissed as, they don't care. You know, every charter school has a long waiting list of parents who want to send their children there. But there's a cap on how many charter schools we can have. That needs to be changed. But anyway, they all have waiting lists. So parents are saying, here's an option, here's a choice, it's a better school. I want to send my child there. They're all packed, and they all have a waiting list. Parents who seem to be uninterested suddenly have an interest when they have options, when they have the opportunity for choice. We have private schools. They're growing in number in some states. But the most significant change in American education, I think, of the last 20 years has come in homeschooling. This is one of the most exciting options in education reform. 20 years ago, homeschooling, the idea that parents who themselves were not teachers could somehow educate their own children, was not widely accepted. Some states even made it illegal altogether. But now it's legal in every state, and in some states the freedom to do this is vast, it's enormous, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. What would you expect to find among homeschool students and their test scores? Are they higher or lower?
Higher.
Higher.
Yeah, much higher. Why? How would you explain that? They're being taught by parents who don't know as much, supposedly. They don't have the degrees. They don't teach in a government school. How could the students learn?
They enjoy learning more.
Because they make children to interest more in the lessons.
Exactly.
And to read more.
You're right. They instill a desire to learn. Studies have shown that so often in our traditional schools, that although the students come to the first grade eager to learn, most of them, oh, school, this is great, you know, friends, I want to learn. By about the fourth grade, their attitude changes. It's like, get me out of here. But in homeschools, the students' desire to learn continues, grade after grade, year after year. That's a strong virtue of homeschooling, and as a result, the perceptions of homeschooling in America have completely changed. Now you have some of our major universities like Harvard, Princeton, they're looking for homeschool graduates. That's the kind of student they want. Their test scores are high. They're winning national contests like spelling bees. Over and over again. The champion spelling bee often is a homeschooler. So I think that's an option that we need to continue. And I'll close by just saying that if you're thinking about how can we improve education in Romania, I would make two suggestions. Well, three maybe. One is to try to build reforms along the lines that I've suggested. Choice, accountability, parental involvement, anything that moves things in that direction will generally be very helpful. But you can do some very specific things too. One might be allow tax credits to parents who choose a private alternative. Why should parents be forced to pay twice? Now, here's a creative way a tax credit is kind of like a refund on your taxes. It doesn't have to be the full amount that you pay in taxes for schools. It doesn't have to be the full amount that the state spends per pupil. You could start out with something smaller. In fact, in Michigan, we said, look, the state is spending about $8,000 on average per pupil. Let's give parents a $4,000 tax credit if they take their child out of the public system and put them in the private system. Okay? What does that do for the public system? Well, it means the state saves $8,000, but it only costs them $4,000. So what's the net difference? $4,000. Every time there's a migration of a child from the public to the private system, the state saves $4,000. The child gets a better education. And with the savings of $4,000 in the public system, you could, if you want, you could give that back to taxpayers through a tax cut, or you could put it in the public schools to further, perhaps, if there's a need for that. We've always said, let states have choice, that option. So tax credits might be a way to proceed to improve education here, to give parents an opportunity to send their children to private school. And then another recommendation I would make is to seriously open up the education system to homeschooling options. When parents know that there are things out there like the Khan Academy, resources on the web, software that's now cascading forth from educational resource companies, homeschooling is more possible than ever before. I understand that in Romania, you have private competition, private provision in kindergarten, right? You have choice, you have accountability, you have private provision. Then that kind of disappears, right, from first grade to high school. And then you have a little bit of private options in high school and some private options and choice in markets and universities. The question we should all be asking is, what's wrong with grade 1 through 12? Do parents suddenly at grade 1, the interest that they had in their child for kindergarten disappears, and now the state has more interest than they do, and then that comes back later in high school? I mean, it's ridiculous. So look for ways to open the system up to choice, competition, and accountability. With that, I know I've gone a long time. I should end and open it up for questions. Thank you for being so attentive. You're a great audience. Questions?
I have a question regarding homeschooling. How do you integrate this with the system? For instance, in Romania, from my knowledge, I have no knowledge of the possibility of having a pupil or a child homeschooled, and then equivalent to the diploma with something that you graduate in a normal high school or something like this. How do you do this in the United States?
In the United States, it wasn't easy. As I say, about 25 years ago, a lot of people were unaware of homeschooling, or they had a negative perception of it. But there was a homeschooling association started that has tried to educate the public about, hey, it can be done, it is being done, it can work well. And through that process, more and more publicity helped to educate the general public. So now they have, and that came at the same time there was growing awareness that there are deep problems in the public system. So parents were open to new options. And now that we have so much home education happening, almost everybody knows a homeschool child. So they can see it in their midst now, and that's only spurring it further.
And do they have, after graduating, sort of, I don't know, checkpoint grade where they have their
Yes.
grades from home? So,
Yes.
So,
Yeah, they
okay.
typically do, and some states actually do require, they don't care how you get there, but they do require that the students take certain exams
Ah, I see.
so that you can compare. Or some colleges say, look, if we like homeschool students, but you do have to take an entrance exam, we want to know how much you know. So that's pretty well taken care of. But they don't, the government doesn't regulate how the student gets to the point of passing an exam. Parents have much more freedom to use innovative methods. So the state is saying, we only care that they know. We don't care how they get there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm from Germany, so I have also a question to this homeschool teaching. In Germany, at least, more and more parents have to work. They cannot stay home. So there's a big discussion, and even now they bring their children at the age of 2 years old in the so-called pre-kindergarten. So that might be an issue maybe of how to do that. And then a second question is, well, I think maybe because if you go to school, you interact in a classroom with other fellow pupils, and if so you learn social skills also,
Yes.
which you might not maybe learn as much as if you just taught by your parents, and so you might be a very intelligent person at the end and pass all the exams, but your social skills may be very poor, let's say. So what do you think about
Yeah,
that?
these are very good points. The first one about, well, some parents work. I would never argue that homeschooling is for everyone. Any more than I would say that only one system, one program, one magazine, one book should apply to everyone. Homeschooling would not work well in some homes. All I'm saying is allow those homes to make that choice. Because in some homes, it would be the best choice. And any law that prevents it is simply saying to those households, you can't do a better job. So you're right, in some cases it wouldn't work. Although, because of the internet and software and other technological changes, that's becoming less and less of a concern. It's easier to do it, even if one or both parents work at home and than it used to be before. So that may be lessening. On the social skills issue, this was one of the concerns that was popularly expressed in America maybe 25 years ago. We used to sort of joke about it at our office. Every time we saw, say, at Michigan State University after a big football game, there was a riot, and property destruction, we would joke and say, the homeschoolers are at it again. And the reason that was funny was, it was not the homeschoolers who supposedly didn't have the social skills. It was the non-homeschool children. Homeschool children tend to be very respectful of property. But the homeschool community has responded to this concern by becoming much better organized. And so now it's very rare for homeschool children to never leave their home. They have competitive athletic programs that involve whole communities. Even in places where parents are not, homeschool parents aren't given a tax credit, they do have places where the government schools say, well, at least you can use our gymnasium. After all, the taxpayers, you're paying for it. So they have interaction even with government school children. At our foundation, we have a program that serves homeschool debate clubs. There is a thriving competition all across America of homeschool debaters, debate societies. And when we do a debate program, we get 300-400 of them who come. So there's lots of opportunities now for interaction in person. So I think I think the social skills question now in America is not raised anymore, simply because they get lots of interaction. And what's important? There's an educational theory that suggests that the interaction that's most important for children as they develop is not peer-to-peer, it's interaction with adults. That there's an immense amount of information to learn there. And so you often have homeschool communities where parents come in and they're interacting with other parents' children in an educational setting, and that's very beneficial to the students. So you don't any longer see that issue of isolation and lack of social skills. Yes?
Actually, it's not an observation. First of all, I want to say thank you for coming today. It was a pleasure to hear you. And I also wanted to say that I am actually a product of homeschooling because I was forced to learn in a system described by you earlier. In Romania, before 1990, you know, we had a communist system here.
Yes.
With my father, Ceausescu, and his wife, my mother. So I was forced for every day for 5 hours to lose some time in school, in public school. And then came the real school. Of course, my parents were going to jobs, who were out of Bucharest because they were forced by the communist government to work out of Bucharest. And I was raised by my grandmother, who came from an aristocratic family. So I took lessons of swimming, English, French, and so on. And my colleagues can say that I don't have social problems now. But I have a problem that my family didn't get their money back. I can say that I learned so many things in 12 years of school. I didn't go to kindergarten. I stayed there for 2 days and I ran. So that was my observation. And I also want to say that I'm very glad that today are so many young people. I know that half of them are coming through an Erasmus program. So I am very glad that we are using public money in a good way.
You know, you made me think of something. In a sense, we're all homeschooled, at least partially. Is there anybody who never learned anything at home? Did you, what you know, did you learn only in the classroom? So you're partially homeschooled.
And you learn not by listening to your parents or grandparents, but doing things with them and seeing them. It's more important than listening to them.
Yes.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking at all these ideas that you gave, and I'm trying to put them somewhere in the Finnish model of schooling, where you have 95% of schools that are public, and very small amount of private ones that, as far as I know, are not doing so well as being private. And I know that because I've been there as a student for half a year. And the idea in Finland is like this: if you're a school and you get money from the state, and supposedly it's free. We all know that it's coming from everybody that pays taxes. But the school, if it's not performing well, is being shut down. It's literally being shut down, and the students are going somewhere. Of course, they provide transportation for students and everything. And somewhere especially in the north, where they have very hard winters, they're trying to do the best for the students. So sometimes the teachers are very flexible of going to homes and teaching and so on. But my question is, do you think that when comparing two systems, two schooling systems from different countries, do you think it's a question about corruption in the system? Because I see a very good public system in Finland that's working quite well, and in Europe at least, according to statistics, they have the best products are coming from Finland, the students. And let's take any example like Romania, where public school is totally down.
I'm not well acquainted with the Finnish system, but I will say this, that no system is so good that it can't be made better through choice and competition. In fact, if it's so good, we wouldn't have to be worried about what competition and choice might do. Because if you're right that the system is so good, but all of a sudden you give parents some new options, new abilities to create new schools, but they don't do that, they'd rather stay in the system where they are, well then, hey, that's the result of choice. There's nothing to fear from choice, and everything to hope for, to give us hope for some improvement. So it might be that for cultural reasons, Finnish public schools are among the better ones. I wouldn't dispute that. But they can't, they're not certain they can't be made better through choice and competition. But see, that's not peculiar to education. I would say that about anything. I would say that about books. I would say that about computers. I would say that about buildings. I would never say that, oh, they're just so good, we don't need any choices beyond that or competition. No, choice and competition can make even the best even better. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I just want to mention that in Romania there is already this homeschool association, but the big problem is that it's linked on the religious point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the reason why most of the people don't stick to this association.
Yeah.
This association tries to imply this model to the government, but the Ministry of Education is not, for this kind of education. They say, you see, the gypsy, they don't come to school, so this is a reason, an extra reason not to come.
Yeah.
So now in 2011 it was a project and it was given to the government. They are not agreeing right now with this system. Actually, I am in this homeschool association. I'm an Orthodox, but this association is from evangelistic church. I'm not evangelistic, but I want to homeschool my kids, and I am already doing this because actually my kids get a cold anytime they have to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
So I've discussed this problem with the teachers, and I'm on a private system,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to go with them only to the testing.
Yes.
So they are not ill anymore. They learn, they have high grades, and they are very social. But this is, it is not the correct way to do things, because they are in a system, but they actually are not in that system.
Yes.
So what can we do? Because the government, the Ministry of Education, will never agree with this proposal. And it is made, I think, 20 years already. I think it's longer than you did. How did you manage to solve this problem? Thank you.
It wasn't easy. Homeschoolers began to organize in states where they were permitted but regulated. Every time state governments tried to issue new regulations, it became increasingly hard for them to do that because homeschool parents were organized, they were writing letters to their legislators, influencing them, and finding lots of other allies in the community. So political pressure was brought to bear in many states to open this up. Your point about a lot of homeschooling being motivated by religious concerns, religious issues, is important. That's how, probably more than any other reason, that was how homeschooling began in the United States. People who thought they wanted some religious instruction for their children. I think that a thriving homeschool community should embrace much more than that. And now in America it has. Some homeschool parents are teaching, are providing religious instruction as part of the day, but there's a growing number of homeschool parents that they're not interested in that. They just want good education. And so now Americans are not looking at homeschool education as exclusively religious-based. Some are, a lot of them are not. That's what you need. You need, once people realize that it's not just religion, but it's the desire for a better education that's motivating the desire for homeschooling, then it can be more widely embraced by the broad public, I think. So how to get there? I wish I was more familiar with Romanian politics and culture. I could be more specific.
Don't be.
But I would.
No, it's a mess. Sorry, it's a mess because we lost our values.
Yeah.
We lost our values. I don't want to blame the communism, but this is the result. We don't know which are our values. So this is the point we have to start, but the politics is the same.
Well, I would say this. Never give up.
Oh, be sure. I will.
I think I may have told Bogdan this, so maybe I'll share it very quickly. Can I tell you a quick story from Poland that has always been an inspiration for me? It's a little different context. It's not about education, but you'll see the point. In 1986, I spent time with people in Poland who were active in the anti-communist resistance, the underground, taking great risks. This was after martial law was declared in December of 81, and before the big changes of 89. And I spent every night at a different home, one step ahead of the government, staying with people who were active. They were underground printers, they were underground, you name it. And one night, I spent an evening at the home of Zbigniew and Sofia Romaszewski. They had run underground radio for Solidarity from December of 81, when martial law was imposed, until the middle of 82, broadcasting a message of freedom for Poland. And they were detected and arrested in the middle of 82. He was given 4 years in jail, she was given 3. Kept in solitary confinement, apart from each other most of that time. When I visited them in November of 86, neither one had been out of prison very long. And yet they were active again on behalf of freedom for Poland. Not in radio, but doing other things. And I asked them questions about what it was like to run an underground radio. And at one point I asked them, when you were broadcasting, how did you know if people were listening? How could you know? And Sophia answered this way. She said, we wondered that too, because we could only broadcast 8 or 10 minutes at a time, and then we had to leave and set up someplace else, to avoid being detected. But one night, while we were broadcasting, we said on the air, if you believe in freedom for Poland, blink your lights and call your friends who think the same way and ask them to blink their lights so we get some idea of people listening. Are they supportive? And she said, we then went to the window, and for hours, all of Warsaw was blinking. Now, what does that tell us? I mean, here they were up against the Army, Navy, and the Air Force of the evil empire. You could have said to them, gee, why don't you give up? How can you ever win? The obstacles are too great. They didn't care. Once you know that something is right, once you know that it's supported by moral principle, that it's something that comes with you by virtue of being an independent, autonomous individual, it's a natural right to be free, then work for it. Don't worry about the obstacles or the barriers. Don't worry about, whether or not, what the odds are that you might succeed. The one thing that's sure is that you will not succeed if you give up. So I don't want to belittle the obstacles that you may face. But someday, when big changes for the better happen, and you rejoice in that, you will look back and you'll say, oh, there were some tough times. There were moments when I thought we could never succeed. But thank goodness we didn't give up. We persevered and we prevailed. So that would be the spirit I would impart. Maybe it's easier for me to say than it is for you to do. But I do know that what's worthwhile often takes endless struggle. And good people will stay focused and eventually make it happen. I hope that's helpful. Yes, sir.
My name is Adrian. I'm from Spain. And about the thing that you said, the option, to give the option to the parents to choose the schools for his children. Now in Madrid we have this discussion because the government wants to give this free option for the parents. But also there are another, the political opposition said that it doesn't mean, in the theory it's a good idea, but it doesn't mean in the practice these reasons, because they said that in the practice the schools will take the students that they want, and not the parents.
Yes.
because the schools prefer to have better students and students with structured families and with economic things. And what do you think about that?
Well, one of the virtues of a system that allows for choice is that when parents can go over here instead of there, it actually creates incentives for the bad school to improve. So even those who may not be able to leave for one reason or another, they tend in the long run to do better if their school knows that they have to do better or their customers will go sooner or later go someplace else. So sometimes it just takes a little bit. Well, let me put it this way. How many customers have to leave a bad restaurant before the restaurant either improves or closes? Does everybody have to leave? No, usually just a few. And the restaurant either then fixes the menu for everybody, or if they don't, they go out of business. They should, if customers don't like them. But they have greater incentive to improve for those who stay behind when just a few people can leave. So the fact that some can leave tends to be helpful. But certainly the fact that some people can't leave is not a reason to prevent those who can from leaving. Otherwise, that would be like the argument I gave with the school board in Michigan, where the guy said, you live here, you go to school here. That's that kind of mentality, that you can't leave, even though it's better for you, because we have a rule that says everybody has to stay. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't make the district improve, and it doesn't give the child who wants to leave the opportunity he needs. So we should not be afraid of choice and competition. What we should be afraid of is a system that says, we know what's best for you, and it's right here, you stay there. That's what we should be afraid of.
And do you think that with this system, the rich people or the people with more money will be in the same schools, and the people with less money or with other difficulties, familiar difficulties in schools?
Well, in Detroit, where the public schools are really, really bad, but they've begun to allow charter schools and hopefully someday even tax credits. You have charter schools now that are appealing to students across the income spectrum. So, yeah, in a free marketplace, you will have schools that attract people for different reasons. You'll have variety. But any system that tries to achieve both quality and equality in every way will end up with neither.
I have an observation to this. In here we created a small experiment which is called the Romanian-Japanese Study Center. And of course this is kind of an after school for the students, so people have to pay more money to get this kind of service. But each year we are thinking about bringing students who are, let's say, more willing to learn and gifted. So we are giving scholarships. So this is also about the school. Most of the students who are getting the best grades are not those coming from the wealthiest families. So the schools also have to think about this.
Yeah. And the parents who are lining up to get their children into these charter schools, these new choice schools, you might say, they tend not to be the wealthy parents, because they already have some options that poor parents don't have. They tend to be the parents who have the least in the way of material needs and opportunity. They're the ones who are lining up and waiting to get their children in these other schools. The wealthy find a way to take care of themselves. But if you want to help the poor, choice in schooling is one way to do it. Give poor parents options, opportunities. Empower them with choice.
I think they will look after their investment in education better than the government probably.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, because the government tends to focus on the system. You know, making sure it has employment, that the system supports the system supports the politician. The purpose of the system should be to serve the children. Yes, sir.
Do you think that the development of technology itself and the rising involvement of social networks in our lives have something to do with the bad result that students are getting today?
All the rise of, say, video games. Yeah, I mean, with anything new, you know, you have good things, bad things about it. I think it's probably not so good that a lot of students spend a lot of time, you know, in video games. But by the same token, in some cases they're learning some skills that way. But again, I'm not afraid of variety and choice. And I'm not afraid of people making mistakes. I just want them to learn from their mistakes. I want them to be in a situation where if they make mistakes, they bear the consequences instead of imposing their mistakes on other people. That's the kind of system we want. We'll never have a society where, you know, everything's perfect and everybody makes always the right decisions. But what you do want is a society where people are free to make decisions, bear the consequences, learn the lessons of their mistakes, and enjoy the successes of their good judgments as well. You don't want to penalize good judgment, and you don't want to reward failure. To the extent you do, you create incentives in the wrong direction.
What would you do with a system like Romania, where you have public schools that, of course, are not so good, and some of them just take a lot of students and award to the best ones some grants that are not even sufficient to cover their cost of living, let's say. And you also have some private universities, and I will not name any of them, that are just printing diplomas for your studies. And the students are somehow, they want to get that diploma because the state imposes that you have a diploma. They're licensing you to have something in order to employ you, but there's a paradox. You're going either for the diploma or for the studies or for the cheap studies.
The schools or universities that do those things, how are they funded? Directly from the government or from?
We're talking about the private ones,
Or you're talking about
the private one. There are private schools that practice the system of awarding diplomas to masses, to a lot of students, and they have low tax, but they're profitable because given the number of students,
they're funded entirely by
students,
by the students and the tuition they pay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say it sounds as though you need an even more vibrant private sector, more choices, even not less. That some of the bad private schools need to go out of business. But they can't go out of business if there aren't lots of other private opportunities that parents can go to.
And thank God for the crisis. Because now companies finally in Romania are thinking about what the graduate must know, and not about the diploma. Thank God. Finally.
So it sounds like in Romania, although you have some private sector education provision, it's kind of stunted, maybe even protected, maybe even overregulated, maybe even really not thoroughly private. How easy is it for new options to appear?
It's very hard.
Let's
That's
say
why I opted out from the system.
Let's say that some of these students that are a product of private education in Romania and bad private education, they also have some good positions in the government, and they're keeping the.
No, it's just a matter of overregulation. I mean, you hear everything from what you have to teach in class, how many points has your curriculum must have, and so on. And it's regulated. Everything is regulated.
So you get a much more thriving, open, entrepreneurial private sector in education. If it's so heavily regulated and stunted, then yeah, you get distortions. But it's like saying, well, what if you have bad private restaurants? What's the answer to that? Ban them? and so have only government restaurants? No, then you have all restaurants are bad. What you do is you give them more competition. You make it easier for people to say, here, hey, come to my restaurant, because it's better. So no one should ever say that markets always provide, that every product that anybody provides in a free market is going to be good. No. The idea here is you allow for options to appear and consumers to choose. And so the bad ones tend, in a thriving, vibrant free market, they tend to go out of business or they improve. So it sounds to me as though you need more competition, more private provision, deregulation, more options, not less. Well, I've kept you a long time. I just want to say that this has been one of the highlights of my visit to Romania, to have such a wonderful group of young people listen so attentively and ask good questions. I hope I said something that might be helpful. And can't thank you enough for coming today. And again, I thank the rector and Professor Glavin for the invitation and the opportunity to be with you. Thank you. I look forward to it.
I would like to make. The first one is that I'm very glad that we meet today here. It is our first meeting after the summer holiday. We wake up earlier and start before the academic year, before we want to advance the cause for freedom further this year than we did last year. And I promise that we'll focus our efforts in the field of education this year. And the second point is that if you want to take home with you the talent and the insights of Professor Reed, you will find that my colleague Bogdan Opreanu, his essay on the Great Depression, the great myth of the Great Depression, at a very modest price. So, thank you again. Thank you.